Hey guys, welcome back to more ripe stories. In this video, a Karen neighbor kept repeatedly parking on my farm without permission, as well as trespassing and disrespecting me. I ended up towing her several times. Here is what happened. So for context, this happened in Southeast Asia. About a year ago, I inherited my grandparents' farm. I did not know them that well, but there were not a lot of options in terms of family members who would willingly run it. I stepped up to the plate despite my lack of professional farming experience, but with a bit of help, I would say everything was going smoothly within a couple months of learning curves. It's a nice place, honestly. When I first accepted the deal, I thought I was selling my soul, but the farm does me good. Good views, fresh air, and even a nearby housing development, so I don't feel too isolated. Well, at first I thought it would be a positive. I soon met Karen though, and no, that's not her real name, but you probably see where this is going. A mid-30s woman who had recently moved into one of the newly built houses next to the farm. For a bit more context, there's not a lot of space between the farm's borders and the housing complex, but there's definitely enough room in the surrounding area that I didn't think I would ever be bothered by my neighbors. Well, sure enough, Karen would be the one to break that streak. The first time I saw her car on my property, I was just confused. It was a bright red truck, which ruled out the first idea that it was some kind of construction guy who just misplaced his stuff. Even if it was just someone's car, which I figured had to belong to someone in nearby houses, I thought it was just a guest who got confused and did not see the border marking. Though they are pretty damn hard to miss. However, a bit of the grass was torn up and it was obvious that there was no respect for where it was being parked. It was not even lined up with the field or anything. Well, I decided to just get my chores done and keep an eye on the car until someone came back, and this would just be a one-time misunderstanding. Well, a few hours later, Karen showed up in her bright pink outfit and, let's just call them stylized highlights in her hair to be nice. She looked at me like I was some peasant when she saw me waiting by the car. Rudely, she demanded I leave her car alone and that there was nothing for me to steal. I kindly explained that I was just confused as to why someone was parked on my property and that now I had met her, she could just move her car and it would be over. Without me asking, she went on this long rant about how she worked her way from the ground up and bought one of the nearby houses for herself and that she deserved to park wherever she wanted. I asked if there were any real parking spots closer to the houses and she said there were, but they are always full and she does not feel like parking a block away. I tried to be sympathetic, but I just wanted her to go away. Once again, I mentioned that her car was on my property and that since it was a one-time thing, I would let it slide, but she just kept making up all these excuses about how that was not how property lines work and that I did not own the farm because she did not see documented proof and so on. At that point, I was getting pissed. I told her to get in her car and find somewhere else to park, or I would have her car removed. I guess she saw it as an empty threat because she just laughed, got in her car, and then left. The rest of the day, I didn't even think about her. She was not worth my time, and she absolutely was not gonna ruin my afternoon break with her weird antics. A couple of beers made her go away pretty fast, but unfortunately, it was not the last. For the last couple of weeks, I had been working on plowing one of the fields in the back corner of the farm. It was not professionally done, but I was proud of it. Well, imagine seeing your weeks of progress get literally run over the next time you go check on it. That same red car has obviously run right over a patch of the crops without any care, and the worst part is she did not even park on the crops, just went right through them. I actually struggled to find any motivation she could have had that wasn't malicious. This time though, I was not gonna let my kindness do the talking. As soon as she came into view, I pulled out my phone and started recording her. I did not hesitate to let her have it this time. I loudly explained how she had no respect for me or anyone else who lived here and how she had deliberately run over crops. Mirroring me, she pulled out my phone and started screaming about how I was harassing her for something she didn't do and that if I did not back off, she was gonna call the cops on me. I had no problem telling her that I had pictures of her car from both times and that if she did it again, I was gonna let the tow trucks handle it and the police would not be able to help her. She just kept throwing her tantrum and trying to find some way to blame me for her car, but she eventually gave up. Full of crocodile tears, she once again got in her car and drove away. I made sure she heard one more time that I was serious about having her car towed. By that point, I made sure to write down her name and license plate. I had a feeling I would need to use them eventually, but I didn't expect it to be the next day. In the morning, I decided to pay a visit to the housing complex. Apparently today was some kind of neighborhood party celebrating 1 year of construction or something like that, so everyone was gathered in the middle of a cul-de-sac with food and drinks. I met some nice people, none of which seemed to be the type to hang out with Karen. I asked if anyone knew her, and immediately their energy seemed to decline. It turns out she did have a reserved parking spot, but she was put on suspension for hitting too many cars and refusing to pay for damages. I also learned that calling the cops was her go-to threat in any situation, and that I just needed to stand my ground against her. I shared my story with the neighbors, and one of them was very curious when I described her car. He had arrived late and said that he just saw the car on the farm again. I was done. I thanked everyone for their help and walked straight home as fast as I could. Once again, after a bit of searching, I found her car. It was on the opposite side this time, not damaging anything but grass, but still on my property, and Karen was nowhere to be found. I hesitated to call the tow truck services as a better idea came to my mind. Hooking up her car to my tractor, I moved the car outside the property, closer to the houses, so I essentially towed it away myself. There was a mud pond that was a long part of the border, and I made sure her car got as close to it as possible. From the houses I saw a few of the neighbors laughing and cheering, and I couldn't help but smile. I quickly hid the evidence and pretended to walk back outside when I saw her coming. She was furious. She could not decide between yelling at me and moving her car before it rolled back into the mud, but she eventually chose the latter. By that point, I saw a couple of the neighbors from across the field laughing and recording her as she struggled to move her car. It was on a slight incline, and I made sure the front wheels were pretty dug into the ground. From the way she was cursing at the car and herself, I figured she could hear her neighbors laughing at her and was now just trying to end her humiliation. Eventually, she got herself out of the mud and sped off, not looking at me again, and by this time I knew it had to be over. I mean, she knew I meant business. I was willing to move her car away, and she had now humiliated herself in front of the entire neighborhood full of people who already hated her. Well, would you believe me if I said she had one last attempt to test my sanity? It was not the next day, but it was the same week that I went outside in the morning and saw her car parked on my field again. Her theory must have been that I would only be checking the places she had parked before, since With was a different part of the farm, but I guess she forgot that I didn't have the IQ of a child and would still be working on the farm regardless of where her car was. It was also much earlier than the first two times she decided to park here. I did not see her, and I'm glad I didn't. Without waiting for her to come back this time, I dialed the closest towing company, which I had saved from the first time Karen and I met, and told them that I actually wanted Karen's car towed since she was a repeating trespasser. Luckily, they showed up before she did, and I was quickly informed that the car would be impounded and that Karen would have her chance of getting the car back if she paid the fees. It was good enough for me. I never heard back from her, nor did I even go near the house for a few days. Karen did find out what happened to the car, but she never tried to contact me, even if I knew it was just gonna be her ranting. Also, I followed up with the towing company and found out that she was just as rude to them as she was to me, but she begrudgingly paid the bills. A few weeks went by and my stress levels were way down. I woke up sometimes thinking I would see that red car on my field again, but there was nothing. Eventually, from checking in with my neighbors, I found out what happened. No one was close to her, so we didn't know exactly why, but within that short time frame, Karen had moved out of the housing complex entirely. She didn't talk to anyone or leave anything behind, but we made the good guess that I definitely caused or at least influenced her to do it, and well, I don't care. I tried to just block it out, but eventually I accepted it as a crazy story to tell my friends someday. Running a farm got its own problems in itself, even in the best of times, so dealing with any inconveniences like a crazy Karen gets under my skin faster than it does others, even though I personally believe I gave her more than enough chances. I plan to stay here for at least a few more years, so I think I'll try to get a bit closer to my other neighbors. After all, I think I've got a bit of a positive reputation now when it comes to the neighborhood's pest control. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. And by the way, if you've enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video, because that would help me tremendously. So this happened almost 15 years ago when I was still living in my home country. I worked in a warehouse that served as a distribution center for a supermarket chain. A very famous one, by the way. I was an inspector in the shipping department. Basically, the sorting section would bring to the docks the goods that the store had requested, and we would prepare and load the shipment onto the truck. In the shipping department, there were assistants who did the manual work, aka assembling the loads on pallets, wrapping them with stretch film, and loading them onto the truck, while the inspector checked whether everything being sent to the store was correctly labeled and secure for transport. Additionally, the inspector entered all data in the internal system, sealed the truck, and printed the load summary for the administrative department to generate an invoice. Of course, inspectors also helped the assistants with the heavy lifting. Most of the time this did not interfere with our main responsibilities and actually sped up the process, especially since our shift, the afternoon shift, had an issue with trucks arriving late. Many times we wouldn't finish everything on time, leading to overtime and sometimes having to leave the remaining work for the night shift, which was not ideal since each shift had its own list of stores to attend to and this delay affected them. Each inspector worked with at least one assistant, but sometimes more depending on their workload. Some inspectors had more stores to handle that day, some stores required extra loads or other situations that called for additional help. We had a supervisor who had been with the company for many years and had worked in the department before being promoted. The job was great and everything ran smoothly until a crisis hit another department, leaving it without a supervisor. Management decided they needed someone experienced to lead that department, so they transferred our supervisor there. In his place, they promoted someone from another department who had no leadership experience. Our department was running well with no need for drastic changes, but our new supervisor did not see it that way. One day, I arrived at work and as usual, at the beginning of the shift, the supervisor printed out a sheet listing the stores to be handled that day, along with which inspector was assigned to each one. So far so good, he made some changes, but nothing too concerning. However, before we started working, he called the entire department for a quick meeting. In this meeting, he announced that he had resigned, which assistants would work with which inspectors, and showed us a printed list. To my surprise, there was no name next to mine. In other words, I was expected to work without an assistant, and I protested immediately. I don't remember the exact details of the discussion as it happened a long time ago, but basically, his idea was that as other assistants finished helping their assigned inspectors, whoever was available would come help me, something that already happened naturally as we had a strong sense of camaraderie in our department. Plus, no one wanted to be seen by the bosses standing around doing nothing. But it wasn't enough. It would overburden me. I tried to argue my case, but I couldn't convince him. Other inspectors were also left without assistance, but they were relatively new to the company and didn't say anything. Probably out of fear of losing their jobs or something similar. And well, since I couldn't change his mind, I accepted that I would be working without an assistant. I took the signs for the stores I was responsible for, found available docks for them, placed the signs on the dock gates, and noted on the printed sheet which stores were at which docks, and then went to the dock of the first store I would handle. I leaned against a wall, crossed my arms and waited. Goods started arriving, but I didn't touch a single box. The dock filled up and I didn't move an inch. After a few hours, the supervisor walked through the department to check on things, saw the state of my dock and asked why the load was not being prepared. I simply said, I don't have any assistants, how am I supposed to prepare the load? And remained standing with my arms crossed. Eventually, some assistants came to help me, and when they did, I helped them with the heavy lifting. But soon the inspectors they were originally assigned to needed more help, and of course they left my load behind. By the end of the shift, one load was ready to be loaded onto the truck, but another was only halfway done. I placed the paperwork with the load details in a visible spot for whoever would finish it and left. As I was leaving, my supervisor asked about the loads. Without turning around, I told him where the papers were. He asked if I was not gonna finish them, and I didn't even respond. The next day, he called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, the manager was also there. They asked me what had happened the previous day. I replied, nothing that I remember. They brought up the incomplete loads. I explained that my shift had ended and I couldn't stay for overtime, so I left the information for whoever would finish the job, and I even told the supervisor where the papers were. Then I took out my wallet, pulled out my time card receipt and showed them that I had clocked out at the designated time. They mentioned that I had spent most of the shift standing with my arms crossed, and I responded that I had done my job, which, as stated in my contract, consisted solely of verifying the loads, supervising assembly and loading, entering data into the system, sealing the truck, and printing the load summary, nothing beyond that. I continued by saying that anything else I might do during my shift was purely out of goodwill to help the assistants and speed up the work. But on the previous day I had chosen to exercise my right not to perform those extra tasks because I felt unfairly treated by my supervisor, who had not assigned me a dedicated assistant. That would have significantly overburdened me with tasks I was not paid to do. The manager simply looked at the supervisor and said, "He needs to have an assistant." Then he turned to me and asked me to leave. The two of them stayed there for quite a while. That same day I was assigned an assistant and we never spoke of it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. The new supervisor's stint lasted only a few months before he returned to his previous role. He had put too much trust in employees he was friends with, but who were not very competent at their jobs, and that was his downfall. Our old supervisor came back to his position and everything improved again. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Back when I was 17 years old, my parents decided to kick me out for a bunch of really dumb reasons, honestly. The biggest one being that I did not follow in their footsteps with their political beliefs. They hated that, and how instead of just listening and obeying, I would question the things that they were saying. But the issues I had with them actually started before I even understood enough to get that opinion. My younger sister and brother were their golden children, and it was clear that they wanted a girl and liked her better. Why my brother got better treatment, I have no idea. I had chores while they had none, and yet still ended up getting a bigger allowance. When I got a job, they tried to tell me that I had to split the money with them just because they were my siblings and we had to be fair. And when I refused, we got into this huge fight that ultimately ended with me being kicked out of the house. I don't know what lies they told the extended family, but it was probably me being a troubled child and a danger to everybody. I'll admit that due to the build-up stress from home, I was getting into fights at school and not seen as the greatest kid. Once I left, I felt like I could breathe for the first time and managed to start my way onto a career path in life. My grades plus low income meant college was off the table unless I wanted to pay huge amounts of money, so instead I went to trade school and learned how to be an electrician. I was good at it too, and with work and my own apartment and girlfriend, I was feeling stable and happy. Now jump to modern day and I'm 34 years old and I own an electrician company. It is small and just me, another guy and 2 apprentices. Still, being the boss feels great, and after years of hard work I managed about 2 years ago to get a mortgage on my home for my wife and me. We had a small wedding and my family was not told about it since I have not spoken to them since I was 17 and they kicked me out. Suddenly my parents found out where I live and showed up at my house out of the blue. They aged badly and I did not recognize them at first. They started to pretend like they missed me and how I'm doing so well for myself, talking about the house looking nice, and I could tell that it was all surface level fake and they must want something if they are crawling back to me. I was right. Father, I can see you're doing well for yourself with this house. We wanted to give you some time to get a life together before we came back for our dues. Me, your dues? Mother, we raised you for 17 years. Food off our table, money out of our pockets. We are getting older now and need to recuperate our losses. Me, stop talking in riddles and just tell me what the hell you want. Father, don't use that language in front of your mother. Me, last I checked, I did not have a mother or father. Mother, stop it. We need you to buy us a house. Or just give us this one, since it seems to be pretty big anyway. After all, we are family and you need to take care of us. I really thought she was joking, but no, they wanted me to buy them a house. If you are like me, you might be wondering what the hell happened to their other house, and well, they gave it to my sister after she went to college and majored in art or something that she couldn't get a job with. As for my brother, he didn't even go to college and instead has been living and mooching off of my parents the entire time. I told them flat out that I was an electrician and I did not have a ton of money to just buy someone a house. On top of that, I was not gonna give them anything after the fact that they abandoned me when I was young for no good reason. Finally, I tried to explain to them that having kids means you are willing to give them food and shelter with no expectation of getting the money back from them when they grow up. It's called being a parent, and maybe if they were decent ones I would have some sympathy or wanna help them. But oh man, it gets worse, because it turns out since they had some of my information, they ran a credit check on me and found that I had amazing credit. I did because I don't live outside of my means, and I was also blessed with having the luck of no emergencies that put me in the hole. My father explained to me and spoke down like I was 5 years old that good credit means I can just get a loan. They wanted me to get another house and use my good credit as leverage for another mortgage, therefore putting my current house up as collateral insurance. I exploded at them. Me, are you both really that dense that you think I would do a damn thing for you? You could have come here asking for $5 to save your life and I would tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. Go F yourselves and try to mooch off the 2 children that you managed to keep in your lives. I'm sure if either one of them opened their eyes for 2 seconds, they would also see that you are horrible people. My father tried to tell me off again for cursing, but I did not care, and instead unleashed a string of swears that would make a sailor proud. They left, but it was not the last that I heard from them or other family members. They shared my information and they managed to get, so I was getting phone calls and texts from relatives, and decided that if this is how they wanted to play, I was gonna get back at them. I found out the lies they told my aunts and uncles about running away or being violent at home. Instead, I told them exactly why I'd been kicked out of the house and why I don't want to help them after they did all of this to me. My extended family was not happy to hear this and turned on my parents, telling them it was wrong to try and force me to buy them a house and what they did to me in the past. The only ones that stayed on the side of my parents were my brother and sister, who honestly were probably just brainwashed at this point. I then blocked their numbers for the 4 of them, going no contact and truly keeping them out of my lives. I did meet up with my aunt and cousins, which was nice to at least have some of my old family back. I did not need my parents when I was 17, and I did not need them when I was 34 and getting my life on a good track. Last I heard, nobody was talking to them either anymore, so by harassing me they lost all of their family and know how it feels now. And yeah guys, before we end the video, of course we will read a petty revenge story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "My friend's boyfriend moved out with no warning, leaving her high and dry." So my friend renting a house had a roommate move out and struggling with the rent. Her boyfriend moved in and paid rent as well. So they've been dating and living together for over a year when at work she receives a call, where he said that he had an anxiety attack, called his mom, who calls the crap out of him, and moved out. And I mean moved out. Took everything they could pack in the truck and just left, leaving my friend high and dry with no warning in regards to rent. She now suddenly has to move out and back to her parents. I ended up buying a TV from her, which is still signed into some of his streaming services. Well, you can probably guess what is coming. I screwed with all of his shows, recommend shows saved like the works. I also changed his profile name to Coward, made another profile where the saved shows spell out the word P-U-S-S-Y. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.